What's going on, guys? Pegasus from the Wise Guys. I appreciate you guys for tuning in as always. It's always a blessing to be able to do videos for you guys. You know, don't have the most subscribers in the world, but the ones that I do have, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate you guys. I've been meaning to talk about the Drytron archetype for a significant amount of time. However, when I do breakdowns, when I talk about a deck that isn't quite out yet, I try to fully delve into it, not just do a bunch of YGO replays, not just talk about it and run my mouth for 10 minutes, but literally break down the deck backwards and forwards and in every possible way that you can. And what I found is that this deck will be a meta deck of tomorrow. Now, obviously, control decks aren't quite what they are in the TCG as they are in the OCG. Therefore, Drytron has been doing a little bit, as you see from some of these deck lists running across your screen. It's been doing a little bit of something. However, the issue for the time being becomes, what is it going to do in the OCG? Sometimes we really fall in love with a deck that's in the OCG, and then when it gets here, it flops on its face. And while this deck does have the potential to kind of flop, I don't think it's going to completely flop, and I do think it's at least, at the very minimum, going to be a rogue option. Now, let's jump into the specifics of the deck, and then I'll delve further into detail on playstyles, on ideas, on ideology behind the deck, on what it's going to do for rituals. Let's get into it, shall we? All right, first up, guys, we got to talk about one of my favorite cards in the deck, Drytron Ban Alpha. Drytron Ban Alpha, specifically, all of these cards say cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned with a Drytron card's effect. So therefore, Cyber Emergency will go very easily into this deck because it will be your primary searcher, as well as other consistency boosters like Where Arfdal, maybe a 1-for-1, but I don't really see the need for that, although it would kind of be a setup card. You know, it may be something you want to try, but we'll get into those texts as we go along. But Drytron Ban Alpha specifically says itself that it can add a ritual monster from your deck to your hand. So I'm not going to go over the full card text, just going to go over the specifics of precisely what the card does. And Ban Alpha is probably the most important because it gets you your ritual monsters without ever actually putting a monster on the field. Now, what makes this archetype really, really cool is that it is completely changing the entire mechanic of ritual summoning from worrying about levels, which is an inherent flaw because you lose cards in your hand, where this deck is making up for it with recovery and with ghost card advantage. I'll get into what I mean over time. Now, some of the other cards, obviously Alzada, Drytron Alzada, specifically says that you can add a ritual spell from your deck to your hand, which is very, very important, and obviously a 3-of. So I think the first two that I've mentioned so far are obviously 3-ofs because they tutor the most important cards in your deck, which are the ritual spell and ritual monsters, which we'll touch on in a second. Next up, we got to talk about Drytron El Gamma. El Gamma allows you to have more fodder on the field of play because you can summon a card back onto the field, thus giving you more attack to make bigger links. Sorry, I see the blue, I get kind of overzealous. Bigger ritual monsters overall. And sometimes you can even, off of this card, summon multiple ritual monsters. Sometimes you'll see those in the combo, sometimes you just won't. Sometimes you just don't need that. Next up, Drytron Delta specifically says that you can reveal a ritual monster or ritual spell and draw a card, which, you know, who cares? If you know that it's going to be summoned, sure, I'll reveal it to you. I'm going to summon it in any way, and then I'm going to gain an advantage off of it, which is to draw a card. So it replaces itself. Now, all of these cards operate either from the hand or the graveyard, therefore making this deck's strong point its recovery. Recovery. So this is a control deck that can recover, much like Necroz when it was at its full power. I really think it's hard to make a ritual deck not meta. If it's going to be meta, it has to be able to recover itself because rituals can't recover. The mechanic itself doesn't recover very well. So long story short, Drytron is following the same line of play and the same line of thinking that Necroz did, although it's not quite the same. Where the cool part of this deck is you're not locked specifically to Drytrons, and then that's not even mentioning the spell cards, which I'm about to touch on now. The other card of the Drytrons, which don't remember which I think was Beta. Beta is just not good. It, like, moves a banished one around, which your rituals can trigger putting stuff in the banish pile, but then, like, you know, then you're behind. you're behind, and this deck can already cover out of the graveyard. So you don't really need all of that stuff. Let's just be really frank about it. Now, that's talking about all the main deck monsters. Let's talk about the ritual monsters, which is why you're really going to play the deck. You don't have to play the Speller Trap Popper, which is Drytron Meteornis QUA. He specifically says that if he's ritual summoned using monsters whose levels equal 2 or less, you can destroy all spells and traps your opponent controls. And he also has a secondary effect, which I think is really awesome. And that is specifically if he dies, again, the recovery comes into play where he's going to pull monsters onto the field equal to 4,000 attack. So he's basically going to replace himself to allow you to ritual summon again. Now, guys, that's really solid, but QUA isn't necessarily all the way necessary, but I would recommend playing him because, you know, you just never know what kind of matchups you're going to have. And right now, although we're in a combo / control format with not a lot of back row decks, it's still going to come up eventually, guys. And with this guy and stuff like Red Reboot being cards, and then you got Harpy's Feather Duster, you know, having this card in your deck can just overwhelm your opponent from being able to play a back row deck. And that's another layer of this deck that I really enjoy. But the cover boy of this whole archetype is Drytron Meteornis DRA. DRA is a 4,000 as well with level 12. He specifically says your opponent cannot target this card with monster effects, and if this card was ritual summoned using monsters whose total levels equal 2 or less, it can attack all special summon monsters once each during your opponent's turn. Quick effect, you can banish any number of monsters from your grave whose total attack equals 2,000 or 4,000, then target one face-up card your opponent controls for every 2,000 attack and send it to the graveyard. So target and send. I don't like the targeting aspect, which it makes it kind of weird. That would make it too strong if it could just send without targeting. But this is still a really powerful effect, and being incapable of being targeted by monster effects definitely matters a little bit, although, you know, in the permanents will kind of end your whole day. Now, guys, that's pretty much it for the specifics of the monsters that you're going to be playing, but I wanted to talk more about the spell cards, because the spell cards are the really ridiculously awesome part of this deck, and it basically allows you to play and get really creative with the deck. Meteornis Drytron is a really amazing artwork. I love the artwork of this card. And Fafnir. So Fafnir and Drytron Meteornis are basically Meltdown and Invocation for the ritual type of play, for the ritual style of play. Because Fafnir specifically says your opponent cannot respond to your ritual spell cards, and they cannot be negated. Doesn't that sound a lot like Meltdown? I thought so. Once per turn, if a monster is special or normal summon face up while you control a Drytron monster, except during the damage step, you can reduce the level of that face up monster by 1 for every 1,000 attack that it has. Now, the control aspect comes behind that, because if Fafnir is on the board, your opponent can be in trouble if they are playing a deck that is specifically relying on exceeding or relying on those levels to be able to make plays. So whether that's synchro summoning. Link summoning has kind of bumped a whole lot of stuff, but we still need a lot of stuff with the synchroing and the exceeding. Obviously, with decks coming out like Datascape, that's definitely going to matter. Without question, that's going to matter. So that effect is really cool. The ritual spell working much like Invocation with a Meltdown on the field. You don't really need it, but just in case you don't have the field spell on the field, the Drytron ritual spell can pull back itself just like Invocation, interacting with the rest of the invoked archetype. Meteornis Drytron does the exact same thing, although you do have to subtract attack points from one of your monsters, which usually, if you finesse it right, you can remove that. You can drop a monster's level or drop a monster's attack points, and then go from there, move a card on and off the field, and then ritual summon again. That's just how this card works. The card is really nuts. Last but not least, we got to talk about, as far as spell and trap cards, we're going to talk about spells one more time. Draitron Nova. Draitron Nova, special summon 1 Draitron monster from your deck, but destroy it during the end phase. He's your emergency teleport. He's your way to get going. He's your way to roll. And he's basically your blank copy of what you do not have. and that is really, really powerful. Now, obviously, you're going to have to link away a card, possibly, if it's specifically a card like Alpha, but it definitely goes without saying that this card is really, really powerful and unique to the archetype. Last but not least, the counter trap Drytron Meteor Shower. When your opponent would normal or special summon a monster or monsters while you control a ritual monster, you can negate the summon, and if you do, shuffle that monster into the deck. Now, that is a very, very powerful effect that I feel like is very, very underrated. Although I'm not seeing it in a whole lot of deck lists in the OCG, I do feel like over here it will mean something, because you're never not going to have a ritual monster, and you're always going to have the ability to put something completely back to the deck and have a strong presence and control on the game, because putting something back to the deck is just different. It's just very, very different than everything else. We don't want to banish anything anymore. We don't want to send anything to the graveyard anymore. We want to just completely rid ourselves of the problem, and that's where this Meteor Shower card is very, very good. So let's talk about some of the fringe stuff that's going to really make this deck. First and foremost, you have to uniquely go over every ritual in the game. Uniquely go over every ritual in the game. Don't even look at deck lists, guys. Don't look at OCG deck lists. Go over everything, because sometimes that is how you specifically find something that is a very broken tech that will have a very profound impact on how you're going to go about playing your strategy, being the Drytron strategy, if you choose to play this deck when it comes out in December, on December 4th. Cyber Angels is probably the #1 thing that I came across first, because let's face it, guys, cards like Cyber Angel and Natasha are really, really stupid off the wall cards, because this card is basically a repeated change of heart as long as you have a Cyber Angel in your graveyard. And oh yeah, although all the Drytron's tribute cards like Cyber Angel Ben 10 will slip right into this deck and be free pluses endlessly. Not so much endlessly, but your card advantage will definitely sustain itself, or at least the ability to come back will sustain itself as you try to follow up to wipe your opponent out. This deck can go first or second, but specific to whatever variant that you try to go with, that's going to make all the difference in the world. I think if you want to play Cyber Angels, you're going to want to go second because of cards like Natasha, cards like Vrash, so on and so forth. As far as other cards, you got cards that may make you want to go first, such as Diviner of the Herald. When it drops, it's going to completely change ritual summoning and the ritual archetype and the ritual stuff as well. It just is a really, really powerful card. It's a tuner that gains the level of a card, much like a Decatron, but more so for the light types, the fairy type monsters. And it can really set up cards like Arclight to be able to do things and profit off of them at the same time, and then make rank 6 plays or go into a Synchro 7 normally in this deck. You're going to just have a lot of utility out of this card, and yes, you can play Beatrice and play it very, very well.
It's getting serious on this track, fam.
right, guys. So in breaking down the deck, I use the Star Chip Challenge, which is a scale of 1 to 100 that I use to always try to quantify how good a deck can be, how competitive it'll be, how meta it will be, how close it is to being meta, how close it is to being rogue. So without further ado, I think that the OTK potential of the deck is rather high, but it's not what it could be, just because if you don't have the big ritual, then it's just not going to OTK your opponent like that. It can do well, but it's not going to OTK your opponent like that. The defense is subjective just because of the Herald build versus the regular build. The regular build, not so much. The Herald build, if you go first, the defense is actually going to fluctuate. I think the versatility of this deck, it is changing an entire game mechanic. And when you have stuff like that, I think you have to give it the highest mark that you possibly can for that simple reason. I think the recovery is really, really good just because you can use rituals as free card advantage, dump them into the grave, and then yank them right back out with the ritual spell. And then last, and certainly not least, I think the consistency of the deck is the most important trait of a deck is around an 80. So let me know in the comments if you think this deck is going to be meta or rogue. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time, guys. I'm out. YG, baby!